Hammond, Indiana, is known for a number of things, like being the home of the former NFL team, the Hammond Pros, who were led by the first black coach in NFL history, the legendary Fritz Pollard, in 1925. It would be another 60 years before there was a second black NFL coach, when the Oakland Raiders hired Art Shell in 1989, so Fritz was living well ahead of his time. While Pollard is an icon, and I hope to tell his story one day. Today I'd like to talk about the time 500 local Hammondians gathered together one seasonably hot summer afternoon, wearing their Sunday best, to watch an innocent man get buried alive. But before I get too far into this, you need a little more context. The early 20th century was an era of astonishing medical discovery. Professional science was a relatively new idea. Even the word scientist had only been coined in 1833, but by 1904, rapid advances in medical fields were taking place again. Aspirin, X-rays, and the EKG all burst onto the scenes in the decade prior, and the lines between magic and science were blurred. Anything seemed possible, and in the same month that the American surgeon, Dr. William Keene, presented his research on open heart passage to the Philadelphia County Medical Society, July of 1904, a self-proclaimed clairvoyant named Harry Moretta exploited this fascination with new science and convinced Harry Zirkle, a local Army veteran, to be hypnotized in the large open space of Wolf Lake Park. It may be hard for us to appreciate the popular appetite for sideshows like these, but imagine a time when even radio broadcasting was non-existent. Try to picture your local park streaming a full season of Game of Thrones for a one-time showing, and you'll have some sense of the energy in Wolf Lake that day. And so it was, on the afternoon of July 17th, that before a crowd of 500 leering, buzzing townfolk, Moretta and Zirkle took the stage. Moretta was a known performer and a master showman, but many locals refused to accept his claims of clairvoyance, Zirkle being first among them. Moretta claimed he could hypnotize anyone. Zirkle had said, "Okay, hypnotize me," and it was on. To raise the stakes, Moretta had also said that when once he had succeeded, he would bury his naysayer 6 feet deep and leave him there for 3 days. Zirkle responded with the equivalent of a fake yawn, and when the two finally faced off in Wolf Park, the event had the energy of a heavyweight fight, and similar to a pre-fight weigh-in, the two men stood toe-to-toe at the center of a wooden stage, while Zirkle played to the audience and taunted his opponent. The crowd clapped and cheered, then quieted as Moretta commenced the ritual of hypnosis. Withdrawing his gold pocket watch from his cloak pocket, he suspended it in Zirkle's face. The watch swung back and forth in the expert hand of the hypnotist, while the audience held its breath, and nothing. The first attempt to hypnotize Zirkle failed. A small wave of laughter rippled through the crowd. Unfazed, Moretta tried again. On the second attempt, the crowd gasped as Zirkle fell lifeless on the stage before being caught and lowered to the ground by the closest man. This mob of 500, a few minutes earlier, still murmuring with the absurdity of the spectacle, was itself gripped in a kind of hypnotic stillness. With his antagonist on the ground in front of him, Moretta held up his hand like a priest in his temple and proclaimed loudly, "Harry Zirkle, I command you to remain beneath the earth until Tuesday night, between the hours of 9 and 11. Only then will you have the power to release yourself from me." To emphasize the depth of his terrible powers, Moretta pulled a pistol from his cloak and fired it near the head of the hypnotized man. Still motionless, he placed pepper under Zirkle's nose, and nothing. At this point, what the audience is seeing doesn't look like hypnosis, it looks like death. And maybe this is why they watched passively while a traveling con man buried their neighbor alive. 4 men joined Moretta on stage to wrap Zirkle's body, which had become unexpectedly rigid, in a white shroud. They placed the body in a coffin with a breathing tube and covered it in black cloth, before these men, with great ceremony, lowered it into the ground. He did not appear to recognize his own relatives at the graveside. Finally, as the crowd pressed in, he said in a faint voice, "Water." Next, He asked if the girl was okay, and the question soon murmured throughout the crowd. A young girl in the audience had fallen during the hypnosis, mere seconds before he had. Doctors examined Zirkle head to toe, and when they brought him to his feet, the crowd erupted. Despite 3 days without food or water and limited air, he was able to walk himself home. So, what happened? How did Zirkle survive those 3 days so calmly while buried several feet underground? Or was he really hypnotized? Or was it all a scam? Were Zirkle and Moretta co-conspirators? Also, where did he go to the bathroom? Now, before I tell you, I want you to brace yourself. After thinking through the various possibilities about how I myself would have handled a similar situation, I have arrived at a single answer which addresses all of the questions at once. And the answer is this: I have absolutely no idea, and nor does, it appears, anyone else. What we are left in the case of the live burial of Wolf Lake is something other than a tidy history, and more of an intact vaudeville act where the mystery died with the performers. The simplest explanation that a co-conspirator willingly lay down under 6 feet of dirt and managed to do so without having a raving panic attack is at once the easiest and most difficult to believe. Is it possible that the two men were in cahoots and pulled one over on the earnest citizens of Hammond? Of course, even likely, but never proven, even with a town full of people looking to prove it. We do know from other sources that Professor Harry Moretta was widely advertised as the, quote, only original Hindu clairvoyant, palmist, and medium in America. He also offered a reward of $500 for any person to whom he could not teach the art of hypnosis. We also know that he was arrested on federal charges for defrauding an anxious wife from Milwaukee when he failed to use his hypnotic power to return her missing husband. The woman, named Miss Lincoln, had sent $25 along with a lock of her hair to Moretta, and when her husband did not return as promised, reported the clairvoyant to the police. The party ended for Moretta when he claimed to know the secrets of alchemy and to know how to turn ordinary objects into gold. He stole $2,000 from one man in the scheme, and when the police caught up to him, they sent him to Bridewell House of Corrections in Chicago. But Zirkle, on the other hand, appears to have been a straight shooter. He was something of a part-time party magician. You know the type. Ribbons, rings, card tricks for children. This was actually part of the reason he confronted Moretta in the first place. He thought men like this were giving, quote, magicians like him a bad name. According to his obituary, he firmly believed that the cleaner a show, the more worthwhile it was, and that making life more wholesome, more productive, more beautiful is the most that any man can do. This obituary contrasted Zirkle's magic with that of people like Moretta, those who would, quote, stoop to some of the filth and soilage of earth to make their living. The reference to earth in particular, which he had been buried in, suggests a lingering embarrassment and resentment over the scene at Wolf Park. While Moretta was a fraud in many ways, it seems his gift of hypnotism was real, and that Zirkle paid the price both in humiliation and what sounds like a truly terrifying experience. The early 1900s was the perfect time for con artists, and self-proclaimed clairvoyants thrived. This word clairvoyant appeared in American newspapers more than 250,000 times before 1900 and 1910 alone. It makes me wonder who the clairvoyants of our own age might be. Are they the social media influencers who exploit a growing self-image crisis among young people to sell us products we don't need? Or are they politicians who convince us that their parties and policies will solve everything? They might also be the financial gurus who offer, quote, one simple trick to make you rich, or the health gurus with equally simplistic promises about getting the body of your dreams. Personally, I believe it's all of them, but as you look to call these people out, be careful not to get zircled, so to speak. Just because these people aren't who they claim to be and can't do everything they claim to do, doesn't mean they don't have the power to embarrass you. Being right is one thing, being wise is another. In his attempt to expose Moretta, poor Zirkle played right into his hands. He empowered a con man, providing him some of the best press he would ever get, which he undoubtedly used to exploit more victims.